The man who walked in without a camera. The nurses barely noticed him at first. He wore a plain black hoodie, jeans that had clearly been washed too many times, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't arrive with bodyguards. He didn't bring photographers. No press, no security, just a quiet presence that moved through the hospital hallway like a shadow. It was the children's cancer ward at Mercy Hope Hospital, a place that knew the sound of crying too well. Laughter was rare here. Even the staff had learned to smile with their eyes instead of their mouths. Hope hung in the air, delicate like a soap bubble, ready to pop with one bad scan or one failed treatment. On that cloudy afternoon, the receptionist, Janice, glanced up and met his eyes. For a second, she froze. Something about him looked familiar. His beard was a bit scruffy. He looked tired but gentle, respectful, kind. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to place his face. He gave her a soft smile, almost apologetic. "Hi, I was hoping I could visit some of the kids, if that's okay." There was no arrogance in his tone, no entitlement, just warmth. Janice hesitated. Strangers? Couldn't just walk into the children's wing, even ones who looked familiar. She was about to ask for credentials when a voice echoed behind her. It was Nurse Emily, who had just returned from room 312. She gasped, eyes wide. "Oh my God, you're Keanu Reeves." The man gave a small nod, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, sorry, I just didn't want to make a fuss." Janice blinked. "The Keanu Reeves, the man in the movies. The man people said was a legend, not just on screen, but in real life too. And here he was asking, genuinely asking, to visit sick children. Not to promote a film, not for headlines, just because." Nurse Emily stepped forward. "We have a boy in 312 who hasn't smiled in 3 weeks. He has leukemia, loves action movies, especially yours." Keanu nodded, gently adjusting his cap. "Then maybe I should say hello." What followed was something the hospital would talk about for years. In room 312, little Jason lay pale and weak, a superhero poster taped to the wall above his bed. His eyes were dull. The painkillers helped, but not always, and the chemotherapy had taken his hair and much of his strength. When Keanu stepped inside, he didn't announce himself. He just sat down beside the boy's bed, looked at the poster, and said quietly, "You picked the best one. That scene in the alley? Classic." Jason turned his head slowly. His eyes widened. Are you him?" Keanu smiled. "Only if you want me to be." And just like that, something changed. The boy's lips twitched. His voice came out like a whisper. "My dad used to watch your movies with me before he went to work. He said you were the good kind of famous." Keanu looked down, his voice soft. "Your dad sounds like a smart man." They talked for 15 minutes, about favorite stunts, about cartoons, about how brave Jason was to fight something even scarier than villains. Keanu didn't glance at his phone once. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't distracted. He was just there, fully there. When he left, Jason was smiling. Not just a small one, but a real glowing smile. Outside the room, Janice was wiping her eyes. Emily had already pulled out her phone, not to take a picture but to call the other nurses. One by one, Keanu visited the rooms. He knelt down for every child. He asked their names. He listened to their stories. And when one little girl said she missed her dog, he promised to come back and bring her a plush one that looked just like it. True to his word, he returned the next morning. Same clothes, same quiet smile, holding a stuffed golden retriever in his arms. The visits became regular, never announced, never public. He came on rainy days, on holidays. Once, he even helped the janitor clean up a spilled juice box when no one else was around. No one understood why he came, not until much later. Not until someone in the hospital's finance department noticed something strange. An anonymous donor had quietly paid off thousands of dollars in unpaid medical bills. No request for recognition, no name. Just transfers from a foundation that didn't want attention. But Janice had a hunch. So one day after his visit, she gently stopped him by, "The elevator, Mr. Reeves." "Was it you?" she asked. "Did you pay for Jason's treatment?" He looked at her, eyes steady. And then, without answering, he gently touched her shoulder and smiled. "I just think kids shouldn't have to worry about money when they're fighting monsters." And then the doors closed. What no one knew was that this act, this visit, was only the beginning of something much larger. Something hidden behind the headlines. Something that stretched across cities, countries, and continents. Because Keanu Reeves wasn't just visiting hospitals. He was changing lives quietly, from behind the curtain, and soon, someone was going to pull that curtain open. Whispers behind the curtain days turned into weeks, and Keanu kept coming. Never a schedule, never an announcement. Just the sound of quiet footsteps and that gentle smile walking into the pediatric ward like a soft breeze before dawn. By now, the children had begun to sense it. Nurses whispered about the gentle visitor, and some kids would stay awake longer just in case he came. Jason, the boy with leukemia, had started drawing again. His first sketch? A man with a beard, holding a plastic sword slaying a dark shadow labeled cancer. But while the hospital had welcomed him with open arms, the outside world remained unaware. That was by design. Keanu had seen too much of the world's hunger for spectacle. People chasing stories, not for meaning, but for clicks. He didn't want this kindness to become content. He believed some things were sacred, especially the smiles of sick children who didn't have long to dream. Yet something was shifting. In a small office inside Mercy Hope, a woman named Elena sat behind, a cluttered desk filled with files, insurance forms, and half-empty coffee mugs. She was the hospital's financial coordinator, and she'd always been more comfortable with spreadsheets than with stethoscopes. But something unusual had caught her attention. Over the past 8 months, more than a dozen families had received unexpected relief, bills paid, treatments extended, experimental therapies covered. The funds came from a quiet foundation known only as the Silver Light Trust. There was no website, no contact number, just deposits, consistent, generous, and always arriving right after Keanu's visits. At first, Elena assumed it was coincidence, maybe a silent sponsor or a charity run by some wealthy philanthropist. But one day, she overheard Janice talking in the hallway. "He doesn't even use his name," Janice whispered. "He just writes a friend on the cards." That same week, Elena decided to dig deeper. Her curiosity turned into late nights. She traced the Silver Light Trust's funding back through a labyrinth of shell foundations and holding names. It was like trying to chase smoke in the dark. But then came the breakthrough, an address buried deep in one of the financial forms linked to a small production company in Los Angeles. Elena recognized the name. It was Keanu's old film studio. Her heart thudded. Not because of what it meant about money, but because of what it revealed about the man. He wasn't just making movies. He was using the money to save children no one else noticed. While others chased fame, he chased silence. While others posted photos, he carried plush toys and whispered hope. It wasn't just donations, it was purpose, and it was working. But not everyone appreciated his secrecy. In another part of the city, a young journalist named Luca Harper had stumbled across something curious while covering a medical feature. He was ambitious, hungry for a big break, and tired of writing fluff pieces. When he learned that several children's hospitals across the country had received sudden, anonymous donations matching the pattern of the Silver Light Trust, he started following the trail. And like Elena, he found himself tracing it back to Los Angeles. He didn't want to ruin a good thing, but he knew the world needed to see what was happening. He started asking questions. Hospital staff were tight-lipped. They respected Keanu too, much. But Luca was patient, persistent. And soon he got the lead he needed, a blurry security photo from a hospital in Vancouver. A man in a hoodie, walking hand in hand with a little boy wearing an IV bag and a superhero cape. The image wasn't clear, but the eyes were. Luca's editor wanted to run it immediately. "This is gold," the editor said. "Keanu Reeves, the secret angel of the children's wards. Viral in 5 minutes." But Luca hesitated. There was something about the image, something about the way Keanu was looking at the child, that made him pause. This wasn't staged. It wasn't for cameras. It was love. Quiet, strong, and real. He remembered his sister, lost to cancer when she was 8, how she once said, "I don't want to be famous. I just want to be remembered by someone who was kind." And in that moment, Luca made a choice. He closed the file, he picked up the phone, and he called the hospital, not to ask for more, but to say thank you. Meanwhile, Keanu kept coming. One night, a storm raged outside Mercy Hope. The roads were flooded. Most visitors stayed home. But Nurse Emily saw him standing at the door, soaked to the bone, holding a waterproof bag. Inside was a sketchbook for Jason and a letter, not from Keanu, but to him, written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mr. Reeves, thank you for making the scary parts less scary. You helped me be strong. Love, Jason." Keanu didn't say a word. He simply held the book close to his chest. Outside, the thunder roared. Inside, a quiet man stood still in a hallway full of light. But fate was about to test him harder than ever before, because something unexpected was coming, something that would force his quiet acts into the spotlight, something that would make the world finally see him. Not the actor, not the star, but the man who fought monsters with kindness. And this time, the world wasn't going to let him stay in the shadows. The silence breaks. It was a warm morning in Los Angeles when everything changed. Keanu had just returned from a quiet visit to a small hospital in Portland. As always, there had been no interviews, no autographs, just moments. He'd sat beside a girl who couldn't speak anymore but smiled with her eyes when he read to her. He'd helped fix a broken wheel on a boy's toy car and promised to send a new one. And then, without fanfare, he had slipped out the back door the way he came, soft, unseen, and without thanks. But this time, someone was watching. His name was Caleb, 17 years old, thin from months of chemo, quiet by nature. His mom had caught glimpses of the man in the hoodie visiting the children's wing, and she whispered to Caleb that he looked like someone famous. Caleb didn't care for actors, not since his body had started breaking down. But when he saw the man lean over a younger patient's bed and whisper something that made the child laugh, really laugh despite the pain, something shifted. Caleb picked up his phone, not to post, not to record, but to write. His hands trembled, but he wrote anyway, a letter. Open, honest, raw, and then he posted it. Dear world, I met someone today who reminded me what strength looks like. Not the kind that punches or shouts, the kind that kneels quietly beside a sick kid's bed and makes them feel alive again. I don't know his name for sure. He didn't say. But if it was who I think it was, then maybe some heroes don't wear capes. Maybe they wear old hoodies and carry stuffed animals instead. Within hours, the post went viral. At first it was just a few shares, people saying, "Is this Keanu Reeves?" or "Sounds like something he'd do." But then someone recognized the hospital hallway from the photo Caleb's mom had quietly taken. Another person shared a memory of a similar visit in another city. Then came the screenshots, handwritten notes signed "A Friend," plush toys matching scenes from old movies, stories of impossible kindnesses, all pointing back to one man. By evening, the world knew. News channels scrambled. Reporters circled. Like birds chasing breadcrumbs. The story was everywhere. Keanu Reeves revealed as secret hospital donor. He saved my daughter, and no one knew. The star who gives quietly. The silence had broken, Keanu was home when his assistant, Maya, knocked gently on his door. She was the only person he truly trusted with the truth. She had handled the donations, the anonymous letters, the private flights. She never asked why he did it. She just helped. When he opened the door, she didn't speak at first. She simply held up her phone, showing the headline. His face didn't change. He only said, "It wasn't supposed to be about me." Maya sat down across from him. The air between them felt heavier than usual. "I know," she said quietly. "But the world needed this. They needed to see that there's still good out there. And they needed to know it wasn't magic. It was a man. It was you." He rubbed the back of his neck, looked at the floor. Years of grief flickered behind his eyes. The loss of his daughter, the death of Jennifer, the loneliness, the silence, and how, somewhere along the way, helping sick children had become the only thing that made the pain quiet down. "They'll make it a show," he whispered. "They always do." Maya didn't argue. She just said, "Maybe this time the show will save lives." And it did. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. Instead of using the story to chase ratings, people responded differently. Donations poured into hospitals worldwide, often with notes that simply read, "Because Keanu would." Foundations that had been struggling were revived overnight. Celebrities began funding pediatric wings, not for fame, but in quiet tribute. People volunteered. Strangers started paying off medical debt. The ripple had begun. But with fame came intrusion. Keanu's private moments were now under scrutiny. Photographers camped outside Mercy Hope. A tabloid tried to publish the names of children he'd visited. One even hacked a financial leak attempting to trace every dollar from the Silver Light Trust. And then the real test came. A powerful pharmaceutical company, threatened by his foundation's support of affordable alternatives, began a quiet campaign to undermine him. They accused the trust of unlicensed advocacy. They claimed he was manipulating public health narratives. And worst of all, they threatened to sue one of the hospitals he'd helped, hoping the pressure would force him to retreat. Keanu could have walked away. He had no obligation to fight. He had already given so much. But he didn't. He held a press conference, the first in years. He stood behind the podium in a plain shirt, looking into the sea of flashing cameras, and spoke softly but with unshakable resolve. "This was never about me," he said. "This is about children, about their right to smile, to live. And if we live in a world where kindness becomes a threat, then maybe it's the world that needs fixing, not the people trying to help." The room fell silent, not from shock, but from truth, and the world listened. What came next would change everything. A courtroom, a sick boy whose last wish was to meet him, a letter written by Caleb that reached the United Nations, and a revelation that would turn admiration into something much deeper, something that would finally expose the true reason Keanu had started the trust in the first place. But for now, the cameras faded, and the man in the hoodie walked out the side door, just as he always had, quiet, gentle, unstoppable. A name written in tears. It was raining again. Not the kind of rain that made people run indoors, but the kind that lingered, soft, steady, and patient, like a quiet witness to what was about to unfold. Across the city, televisions flickered, radios buzzed, and news articles updated every few seconds. The world was waiting, not for a scandal, not for a film, but for a story that had quietly grown into something larger than anyone could have imagined. In a courtroom filled with stiff suits, flashing cameras, and hushed whispers, Keanu Reeves sat alone near the front, his head slightly bowed. The pharmaceutical, giant Gentrix Labs, had pushed forward with their threat. They filed a formal suit claiming his donations in support of experimental treatments undermined medical protocols and public trust. They argued that a celebrity had no right to fund unapproved miracles. They wanted to shut the Silver Light Trust down, not because it failed, but because it succeeded where they did not. Across from him sat lawyers armed with data, prepared speeches, and cold logic. But Keanu had something else. He had Caleb. The boy, thin and pale, now walked with a slight limp from a recent surgery. He had traveled hours, against his doctor's advice, just to be there. His mother gripped his hand as they entered. Silence spread through the room like a wave. No one stopped him, because in that moment, Caleb wasn't just a patient. He was a voice. He took the stand with trembling hands, looked into the crowd, and began to speak. Not from a script, but from his heart. "I was ready to give up," he said. "Everything hurt. The medicine, the waiting, the way people stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a number." He paused, his eyes locking onto Keanu's for strength. Then he showed up. Not with promises, not with magic, just time, kindness, a presence. And when I asked him why he came, you know what he said? Caleb's voice cracked. He said, "Because someone did it for me once, and I never got to thank them." Gasps echoed softly, and then came the question, the one that changed everything. A reporter stood up from the back and asked, "Who was it? Who helped you, Keanu?" The room held its breath. Keanu looked down. For the first time, the man who never cried in public blinked back tears. His voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. Her name was Isabel. She was a nurse at St. Vincent's. When I lost my daughter, I broke. No one saw me after that. Not really. I was a shell. I walked through life like a ghost. His hands folded on the table. But Isabel, she would bring me tea. She would sit beside me and just listen. Never tried to fix it. Never rushed me. She reminded me that grief didn't mean the end. It meant I had more love left inside me than I knew what to do with. He inhaled slowly, as if tasting the memory. She passed away 6 months later. Cancer. No family. Just a small funeral. I was the only one there. And that day, I made a promise. I told her I'd carry her light. He looked up, eyes red but full of something powerful. That's why I named it the Silver Light Trust, for her hair. It used to shine like silver in the hospital lights. No one spoke, because there was nothing to say. There were no objections, no accusations. Even the attorneys from Gentrix looked down, ashamed. That night, the court ruled in Keanu's favor, but he didn't celebrate. He left quietly, slipping into the rain as he always had. But this time, the rain felt different. This time, it felt like it was crying with him. The next morning, something incredible happened. Caleb's letter, the one he'd read in court, was shared online. Someone translated it into 20 languages. It spread to schools, hospitals, shelters. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations mentioned it during a global health summit, calling it a reminder that healing doesn't always begin with medicine. It begins with humanity. And donations to the Silver Light Trust multiplied. Overnight, Keanu could have stepped into the spotlight then. He could have spoken on stages, received awards, been hailed as a global ambassador for children's health. But he didn't. Instead, he made a quiet visit to a children's ward in a forgotten town, and there, he sat beside a new patient, a boy no one had visited in weeks. He opened his bag, pulled out a small notebook, and read aloud from a letter written by Caleb. A letter about strength. A letter about how even the smallest light can pierce through darkness. And as he read, the boy listened. Not because the man was famous, but because the man was real. And somewhere in that hospital hallway, another quiet promise was made. A new story was beginning. But fate still had more in store, because far across the sea, a child was waiting. A child whose final wish would pull Keanu into something even greater than he'd ever faced. Not a lawsuit, not a headline, but a question no one had asked yet. What happens when the one who gives everything needs something in return? When the giver runs empty, Keanu Reeves had always believed in silence, not just the kind you hear in a quiet room, but the kind that lives inside the heart, where sorrow rests, where memories whisper, and where pain becomes purpose. It was in this silence that he had found his mission, and for years he had poured into others like a well that never ran dry. Hospital by hospital, child by child, tear by tear. But now, for the first time, that well was beginning to crack. The call came. Just after midnight, Maya answered first. Her voice, though calm, was edged with concern. She had learned to recognize when Keanu's silences meant something deeper. "She's from Morocco," Maya said, her voice soft over the speakerphone. 12 years old. Her name's Sarah. She has a rare form of neuroblastoma. Her family sold everything just to keep her alive for one more month. Keanu didn't respond right away. He was sitting alone in the corner of his small, book-filled living room. The light from the street cast long shadows across the floor. He had just returned from burying another child, a boy named Eli whose mother clung to Keanu's chest, sobbing after the machines went still. That sound stayed with him. That kind of grief had a weight you couldn't see. But once it rested on you, it never let go. "She asked for you by name," Maya continued. "Not the actor, not the movie star, the man from the hospital stories, the one who makes kids forget they're dying." Keanu closed his eyes. "How long does she have?" he asked. 3 weeks, Maya replied. "Maybe less. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find the strength to fly across the world again. 3 weeks to look another child in the eyes and pretend his heart hadn't been shattered so many times that it barely beat anymore. But he said yes. He always did. The flight was long. Quiet. The kind that gave too much time for thinking. When he arrived, the hospital was nothing like the ones in Los Angeles. The walls were chipped, the lights dim, supplies were scarce. But the nurses, the nurses, worked with hands full of love, even if their pockets were empty. Sarah lay in the far corner of the ward, small, fragile, eyes too big for her sunken face. When he stepped into the room, she didn't smile right away. She just stared, studying him, measuring him against the stories she'd been told. "Are you the man who brings the light?" she asked in broken English. Keanu knelt beside her. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'll stay until you find out." And he did. For 5 days, he stayed. Not as a celebrity, but as a friend. He helped feed the other children. He fixed a leaking pipe in the hallway. He even gave his coat to a mother sleeping on the cold floor beside her daughter's bed. But something inside him was dimming. The laughter didn't reach as far. The smiles felt shorter. And on the 6th day, when he was alone in the hospital, "Garden," he wept, quietly, like a man breaking for the 100th time. He didn't see the doctor approach until a soft hand touched his shoulder. Dr. Layla was a woman of quiet strength. She had watched him from afar. She had seen the kindness, but she had also seen the cost. "You carry too much," she said gently. Keanu shook his head. "I don't carry enough." She sat beside him, the flowers rustling in the wind. "You came to give her hope," she said. "But what about you? Who gives hope to the man who gives everything?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he didn't know how to ask. That night, something unexpected happened. Sarah slipped into a coma. The doctors said it was her body's way of protecting itself. Her pain was too much, her organs too tired. Keanu sat beside her bed all night, holding her hand, whispering stories she couldn't hear, praying to gods he didn't believe in anymore. And then, just before dawn, her hand moved, barely, but enough. Her fingers curled weakly around his, and when her eyes fluttered open, She whispered something he would never forget. "You're the light, but even stars need to rest." He didn't cry then. He couldn't. He was too stunned. But deep down, her words struck something raw, because for years he had poured everything into others, thinking the act itself would keep him whole. But now, he realized something terrifying. He was running empty. He left the hospital that morning in silence. Maya was waiting at the airport. She saw it in his eyes before he spoke. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he said. And then, for the first time since she had known him, he collapsed into her arms, trembling like a man whose soul had been carrying the weight of 1,000 broken dreams. "You don't have to do it alone," she whispered, "but you do have to let someone help you." Keanu didn't reply. He just closed his eyes, because deep inside he knew something was coming. A moment, a choice, a final chapter that would either destroy him or finally set him free. The light that stayed Keanu didn't return to Los Angeles right away. For the first time in years, he canceled everything. Flights, meetings, even his usual silent hospital visits. He disappeared from the public eye, leaving behind a world full of questions. Tabloids guessed, fans worried, reporters searched. But no one truly knew where he had gone, because sometimes a man doesn't vanish. He simply needs to be alone long enough to remember who he is. He spent a month in a remote mountain village in Japan, staying in a small wooden house once owned by an old friend. The silence there wasn't empty, it was healing. He chopped wood. He made tea. He watched birds without naming them. And every night, he wrote in a journal. Page after page. Not for the world, not for a movie, but for himself. And it was there, in the stillness, that he finally understood. He had spent so many years giving love, hoping it would rebuild what he lost. But love, he realized, wasn't something to pour out endlessly. It was something to share. A knock came one evening. He opened the door, expecting no one, and found Maya, standing with snow in her hair and a letter in her hand. "She made it," she said softly, holding the envelope toward him. Keanu opened it with shaking hands. It was from Sarah, written in careful English. "Dear friend, thank you for being my miracle. I'm not scared anymore. And I want you to know the day you sat with me, I didn't feel like dying. I felt like dreaming." Inside the envelope was a drawing. Two people, hand in hand, walking toward a glowing sun. Keanu didn't cry. This time he smiled. Not the sad, quiet kind, but the kind that rose from the center of a soul finally letting go of weight. He returned to the city weeks later, not with a camera crew, not with a press release, but with a decision. He called a meeting. Doctors, nurses, artists, architects, engineers. He shared an idea. "What if we built a place," he said, "where no sick child ever felt forgotten, and no giver had to carry the burden alone?" And that's how the Silverlight Village was born. Not a hospital, not a shelter. Something new. It was part clinic, part retreat, part school, part sanctuary. A place built on love, privacy, and community. A circle of care, where children from across the world could come not just to heal their bodies, but to be children again, to play, to laugh, to live. And for the givers, nurses, parents, even volunteers, to find rest too. The village stood on a green hillside overlooking a lake. It had no signs, no press tours, just an open gate and a promise. Come as you are. Leave with light. Keanu visited often, not as a founder, but as a friend. He cooked meals in the kitchen, built toy shelves in the workshop, taught a class on storytelling, beneath the shade of the trees. And one day, as he read a bedtime story to a boy in remission, the child looked up and asked, "What's your job here?" Keanu smiled. "I just make sure the light stays on." Years passed. Caleb grew up and became a doctor. Sarah became a painter, sending artwork from Morocco that now decorated the village halls. The Silver Light Trust expanded, quietly, carefully. More villages were built in other countries. Each one carried no plaques, only the same drawing, two figures walking into the sun, and through it all, Keanu remained the same, quiet, present, kind. He never gave interviews about the trust, never stood on stages. But the children always knew when he was coming, because the hallways would get a little warmer, the laughter a little louder. And on his last visit, years later, hair now gray at the edges, he sat under the old tree at the village's heart, surrounded by children who had no idea he'd once been in movies, but knew he made the best hot chocolate in the world. And as the sun dipped below the hills, Maya joined him. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked. He looked out at the lake, where kids chased fireflies. "They won't remember our names," he said. "But they'll remember the feeling." What feeling? That even in the darkest places, someone showed up and stayed. And then, as twilight folded across the sky, the stars blinked awake. Not loud, not proud, just light, quiet, and everywhere, just like him.